probably good. I hate like Twitch delay because like I would go live and it's gonna be like 30 seconds and it's just gonna be blathering. But it'll probably be fine. Actually, it just kind of occurred to me that I didn't plug the speakers in properly. But
We're live.
We're live? Cool.
At least we're live on Twitch.
We're live on, well, probably live on everything. Wait, where were speakers plugged in?
We're live on YouTube.
Cool. We're live everywhere. We'll say that's good enough. So, hello everyone. We didn't have an intro for like 2 minutes there. Alright, hello everyone. This is TVGS Transmissions, and this is our first episode revival of Devs Play, which was a stream that we did, which I wasn't even around for. It was like 2 years ago at this point, but basically it was just like local developers would like come on and play their games and go talk about their process and everything. It was like really fun. So as part of TVGS Transmissions, we're bringing that back, and tonight we have our first developer, Klil, who's playing this game, Plane Defensive. It was also I was gonna say, like, I want to apologize for how late we started because we were conducting an event right before this, and then also like there was a performance art piece going on, so we didn't have the room for like essentially an hour. Although that's going to kind of work out because this stream will be much less shorter. Like, we aren't going to go to midnight, hopefully. Or we might if it's really exciting, so we'll see. But yeah, I'm going to just turn it right over to Klil. I'm going to turn on Unity, and I think everything should work fine. We may have to bounce back and forth a little bit if things start getting weird. Okay. But we'll switch right over to Klil.
Okay.
Is audio good?
Good evening, everyone.
Is audio good?
Yep, audio is good.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Klil Neori, and I will talk to you about Plane Defensive, a series of iterations of a game idea that I have been developing from the start of 2016. Hopefully we'll get back to in the near future. Before I start playing around with various iterations, the impetus behind the game was actually born of frustration. There's a game that hasn't come out yet called Megakure, which is essentially a 3D platformer with rotations through the fourth dimension. And that is a game I've been waiting for a long time. I really liked Super Paper Mario, which had similar ideas, except with the third dimension. And of course, very much enjoyed Fez. And I really like the idea of going beyond the dimensions you have and into something else, and dealing with the fact that there are certain limitations to what you can accomplish. What you can perceive, I'm sorry. And so the idea I had was, well, Megakure isn't coming out, and I'm really frustrated. What is some other way of looking at the same kind of idea, where we're in 3 dimensions, we won't be able to really visualize 4 dimensions, but it's still interesting to have things that are in another dimension, and what would that look like if I weren't doing a platformer because Megakure was doing that? So I thought about something that was kind of like a tower defense or kind of alien invasion game where instead of being able to see where everything is coming from, things would appear because they actually live in a dimension that's higher than your playboard. So I was mulling this for a bit and started playing around with Unity and realized that I could do something very basic to just illustrate that. And I figured, and people in TVGS encouraged me to try something out because thinking is nice, but the real test of any game ultimately is how people will interact with with some version of your idea made electronic and made interactive. So my first attempt was at the interactive showcase last year, probably a year ago or so. It's the first version here, and I'm actually going to show it in a really high resolution to show how that looked. Let's hope that that actually works out.
It might screw the stream a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. So what's the highest? So this is
1080. Yeah. If you want to try it.
I mean, I'll try it, and if it looks, let me know if it looks if
Yeah.
it looks bad, and if it does, I'll
I'm not
just.
seeing anything actually.
It's supposed to be black.
Okay.
All right, so I'm gonna play this, and let me know if you see anything, if there's any problem with seeing anything.
It should be set already. Yeah.
Okay, so this is good. Are you seeing that in stream?
Well, it's gonna be like 30 seconds.
Yeah, we're gonna have a little
It's
bit of
Twitch
a delay.
It's okay.
Probably be fine.
Okay, so you'll
There it
is.
you'll notice some technical silliness regarding this. So, first of all, you will not notice this really, but way over here there's a score numbering. This was a completely technical issue where if you're building something in Unity with GUI elements, you have to basically tell Unity to scale these properly when you have different resolutions. And I was developing on my old laptop that had a really low resolution, and then where we display it has really nice screens that are really high resolution, so you completely miss this thing. Because what you can see the basic idea here. You're in the plane. Sorry about that outside noise. You're stuck in the plane. And you move this thing around, and you only see a little bit of the third dimension. And you do that with, I mean, there's a way of playing around and having more than one camera in Unity. The trick here is basically that I have an orthographic camera, orthogonal camera, for the plane itself, so there's no perspective, no anything. It's as if you're looking at some kind of a piece of paper, which is trying to capture the fact that you're in a plane. And there's a 3D camera looking outside at these invaders coming in. And you're basically trying to push them out. So the text thing was one of the pieces of feedback I was given. Without this score, you don't know what's going on. You don't know that you've made any progress. You've noticed earlier that there's a game over. And it's not clear from the way the game is set up why you have a game over. I mean, to me it was clear because I made the game. But basically, when there's too many invaders, it destabilizes the plane and you're done. It's game over. The idea was that the invaders were coming into the plane for whatever reason. I didn't have a reason quite yet. And the more they're coming from the third dimension. They're going to wreck the space-time continuum, and eventually the game ends when there's too many of them. So that isn't clear if you're just playing this game and you don't have me explaining it to you, which is a problem. Also, the ramping up is a bit ludicrous. It's not very nice. So, and also finally, the idea of having like you have to have a limited amount of things in the plane. It's not very visually appealing for somebody just running into it. And I did want it to be interesting for people who wouldn't necessarily read a manual for it, although that would be nice. So the next step, the next version, was this one, which I presented the month after that. And again, let's see if this works okay in this resolution. Yeah, so there's this whole spiel. I learned very bad lessons from the previous game. I thought, well, maybe I'll explain things to people and then they'll understand. So there's this whole story. I'll read it out to you. Greetings, aspiring cadet. We need volunteers like you to lead the fleet against the fourth dimensional menace. Unfortunately, we can only accept those who succeed in the aptitude tests. To help you prepare, we are providing you with a training game, Plane Defensive. Your goal is to defend the square structures from third-dimensional spherical invaders. You'll be given partial information from detectors looking outside the plane. To get a sense of the challenge, start with a straightforward window detector, then use the menu to choose the side and point detectors, increasing the difficulty. Three-dimensional counterparts to the latter are crucial for real missions. Learn them well. So, from the people who actually went to the interactive showcase, not many of them bothered reading this because I mean you have a very limited time going to play in casually play a couple of games. You're not going to start reading a sermon. So people didn't get an idea of what was going on, and they definitely did not do this almost at all. They did not do. Yeah, so I had a bunch of things I wanted to test out, and people just didn't play around with them because people don't care about these things unless they really are excited about your game. And usually, if they're going to if they're going to a casual gathering about games, they're not. They have no preconception of what they should expect. So I was looking into, well, maybe the game will be more engaging if you follow the camera around, which is kind of dizzying. And then there were the types of detectors. So I worked very hard to make sure that the facing makes sense. But basically the idea was that it kind of squeezes what you can see, and it was supposed to emulate something that might be looking into a third dimension and have a limited amount of information or squeezed information from there using what I have remembered from my optics classes. And then the other idea was to try for a point sensor. Sorry.
Oh yeah, it's a fun. I do that like once a day.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah,
this keyboard is way too complicated for my taste. Anyway, so the idea is basically, you have a detector. It's separate from you, and you can move around and you have this thing it basically separates the thing sensing what's going on outside from the thing that you use to deflect these creatures out. And now I have a win condition. Another thing that people really didn't like about the old version was that there was no win condition. You could only survive, which is not nice when so little is happening. Now here, in another important difference that did get people interested and that people did notice is that these things you have to protect. So what was at stake in the original game was not letting as many of these invaders come in, lest they destabilize the space-time or the plane-time continuum. In this case, I decided it would make more sense. I think somebody made a comment, and I went from that. But that would make more sense to have something at stake that's actually visible. That would be clear what was going on. I mean, I could have a measurement of instability or something, but it wouldn't necessarily work visually. It wouldn't necessarily engage people who weren't just reading to get an understanding. I wanted this to ultimately be playable by most people going into it. So I have you have to defend structures. So the lose condition makes some sense. And you can move them around to protect them, and then you can deflect the things coming from outside. And that was it was better, but again, it didn't capture everything I wanted. I really wanted to get a sense of how I would how people would really engage with something from the fourth dimension if they were living in the third dimension. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, and that's the textual goal of this game in the in the narrative, in the meta narrative that I made by this small sermon in the beginning. But this is really cheating as far as that would be concerned, because somebody in two dimensions is not going to have a two-dimensional screen and be able to engage with it. It's not something that will make sense to somebody in two dimensions. They would understand something that was they would have to understand something way simpler than that. And then I started thinking about it, and I realized that there really isn't any point in making this a 3D, really having 3D rendering in this, or 3D 3D calculations of the level you have in a 3D rendering engine, because ultimately what would work just as well as these screens, and even better, is just a proximity detector. Something that will light up more the more something is close to it, and something that somehow magically works in more dimensions than you are in. and then it gives you some kind of information that that somebody in 2 dimensions would have. So, if I'm not mistaken, that would be the next one. So let's go with this. It's not window.
Yeah, no window needs to be windowed.
Sorry. Yeah. So let's have this windowed. Very sorry. Oh, this is. Yeah. Hold on. Let's put this. Yeah. Let's increase the resolution a bit. One thing you would notice about the previous game is that I did have the text scaling work fine. So
I would do 920 by 1080 because it's like a 4K screen, so it's going to be
this.
like
Yeah. Okay.
that's going to be like 1/4 the size of the screen.
Okay. Sounds good. Awesome. All right. So this was a complete revamp. I made this for Troy by Design. I set up a whole an introduction to the game and everything, trademark capture or whatever. And I have this icon, and now the interface is entirely different. So what I'm doing here is basically drag and drop. And so this is the structure from the last game, except now I can move it around directly. And now there's a level, and it seems like there's no way to win, and that's true. There's no way to win. There is a way to just play forever, but there's no way to win. Now notice that there's actual transition screens between different levels. So here you have the same thing. So this is starting to be repetitive a bit, right? Okay, these things come in and they crash your green things. That could have been illustrated with one, and we'll see that next time. But you'll notice I've moved to there's actual screen transitions. There's more. There's a kind of progression that makes sense, and I felt that was some progress. And then I had this screen. And this screen is where this is what was basically the deflector / camera in the first game, and the deflector / camera or deflector with the camera to the side in the second game, depending on what kind of sensor setup you were using. But the idea is to have something really distinct. This thing is going to push these away, and you'll notice where I placed it. I placed it so that if you didn't move it, it would just block the invader coming out. So yeah, let me just demonstrate that. So that shows the player, okay, this is a thing that's pushing things away, right? And then you can go to, you can drag it, and we may have dragged and dropped earlier. You might not know how to, but if you know anything about dragging and dropping, you know how to go to the next step. And then you see a progression that's positive. The red that went with the invaders seemed like it's negative. Hopefully the green that's like the structures you're protecting is positive. So now we see the element that's a real, these are the detectors. These things, when something gets close by, they get redder. And that's basically what's giving you the sensory information. And right now for this part, it's just giving you information that things are coming. You still don't see them appearing from the third dimension. But it's kind of a buildup. So you see, okay, these things are coming closer, and then the invaders are coming closer. The sensors, triangular sensors, are getting redder and redder as things get close. This is to convey that this is what these sensors do. They're proximity sensors for the invaders, for you to use. And then comes what was basically the actual challenging level. So this is the first time you'll see something coming from the third dimension. So you had this buildup where things were coming, and then you could detect them, and but if you were ignorant of what this was about, you could say, well, okay, so things are coming from outside the screen and from beyond the screen on one of the four sides of the screen, and the sensors are telling me where they're coming from. So that's all. But this is the first time where you actually see something coming from the third dimension. It's appearing, which is and then this is basically, this repeats itself. So you can, if you want, you can use these to defend your structures. You move the deflectors around. Again, that's easy for me to say because I made this game. Yeah, so this should indicate to you that something's coming from here, right? And then this wobble to say that it was showing things. And now this part is the most is the critical part. you have these around you, and invaders are coming from all sides. But the critical, the fear factor of this game, if it ever does become a real survival horror game, is that, or anything really horrible, is the fact that things can come from everywhere. There's no escape. There's no, you can't hide because things can appear. You can't build walls against the third dimension. The deflectors are kind of like walls, but it's not exactly the same. You can't create an area where you're going to feel safe, because things coming from the third dimension can appear anywhere in the plane. And the same way, hopefully, for a future game that's 3D to 4D, there's nowhere you can actually hide. If you're inside a room, however fortified, something from the fourth dimension doesn't care. It's just it can appear inside. So it makes for much more dynamic way of dealing with threats, otherworldly threats. So this was the first one where I had all the copyright notices, and I really invested in actually having a presentation, which is very important. It's important to have a brand. It's important to have some kind of something that explains what this game, at least gives a name to this game, and it is kind of and I tried to make the title have the same coloring scheme as the objects inside the game, and I made all these. There's actually sound effects to this, so which weren't audible, and yeah, is it possible to
You could try. I don't know. I didn't hear anything.
Okay, so this is the computer itself. Let's see if I hear anything. Yes, now you start hearing.
Very,
Okay,
very low.
yeah, so let me just put this on. Maybe. Yeah, sorry about that. Let's see. Okay. Can you hear something? Well, when it gets there.
I'll let you know.
Yeah.
It is there are OBS settings the desktop volumes with molecular order.
Okay, that's legitimate. So as long as it's this audible. Yeah. So.
I don't know. Well, we can hear it. I don't know if stream can you can hear it?
Okay. So.
It's not loud.
So that's another thing. I didn't remember if I had this here or in the next iteration. But one of the things that were a bit of a problem in my previous iterations was the lack of sound, and sound is kind of an important thing in games. It's an important aspect of how you interact with the game. Here it's kind of important because it is another signification of where the invaders are coming from. And it also gives you a clear audible cue to the interaction between things. Mostly what the interaction is between deflectors and invaders and structures. So that was important, and I used that better in later iterations. One annoying thing for people playing this is you'll notice that when I move things around, to make things easier, and I thought it would make things easier to manage or cleaner, these structures that I'm moving around, they don't rotate, which is all well and good, but it means that you basically can create really funny strategies where you can basically, you can block things a bit with structures that aren't supposed to be blocking anything, which I mean is a nice strategy, but it defeats the purpose of it. These are sensors; they're not supposed to be blocks. So that's one of the things I eventually corrected. But and here it's kind of frustrating. You have to kind of, I mean, it's claustrophobic enough that you have to maneuver in 2 dimensions and don't have a 3rd dimension to walk through. It's kind of irritating to have to do that when these things don't rotate. It gives them too much of a stability that they shouldn't have. So the next iteration, hold on. This might have been, hold on, I might have skipped one, so just a second. Sorry about that. This one, right?
Window it.
Yeah. Okay. That's a bit too small, but whatever. Yeah, so this was, okay, sorry. So the one I showed earlier was the one from the next showcase after Troy by Design. This was the first revamp. So you can see you have white on red, and it was just the last level of that version. I was calling it Plain Defensive 2D because I wasn't sure if that was the direction it was going to go. The collision isn't as good, and things are moving outside the screen because I didn't have it adapted to resolution and such. And again, it was just one level. But I did have transitions, and we will momentarily see a victory condition manifesting, which it's kind of important to have. You'll also notice that if you know what the pattern is, you can do things that you're not supposed to be able to do with an invader coming from the fourth dimension, from the third dimension in this case. Namely, you can just move things way far away from anything.
Or off the
also
screen.
off the screen if you don't have the collision bars in the right place. Yeah, so this is I had victory and defeat, and that was it. That was that was the one for Troy by Design. I think so. I think that was it this the 2024 might have been the interactive showcase. No, that was actually the first one I actually put on itch.io. So I put it. It was an interactive showcase, and then I put it online for random people to play. So I can actually show you something that a nice Let's Player who is actually insistent on playing games made by small indie developers. Ivan Plays, I think, with W, played this and showed many ways of breaking this game. So you'll notice that I do have the walls on the corners, and part of that is basically I have these invisible walls that I had adapt themselves to the screen size, which is nice. Yeah, so we'll get to the. I'll show you what Ivan found, which is kind of oversight on my part. I'll show me doing it, and then I'll explain what's going on. Let's see if I can actually do it here. No, it's too little time. But basically, the collision detection was really bad, or rather, it's not the collision detection per se, but the way I set up the colliders wasn't very good. So, and one of the nice things about random people playing your game is that they find the places where the game breaks because they do things you weren't thinking of because they're other people. That's an important way of improving it. Okay, so how did it go? Yes, so if you see how things are sliding, sort of, if you press hard enough, or get thrown out, so you can actually throw, if you do it right, I don't remember exactly how that worked, but if you do it right, you can actually throw things off the corner of the screen, because I basically made it really minimalistic, and it's not, for some reason I can't reproduce it here, but yeah, you'll notice it's kind of dodgy at the borders here, especially when you move very fast. And basically, you can move around really, really quickly, which is also in itself a bit of a problem because it basically reduces the challenge to just moving the thing around until you hit something, which you probably will, and then winning. So the next step after that, after a bit of revision here, this is windowed, excellent, was first of all, I made the blocks in the corners way nicer so that the weird dodgy things don't happen around there. Okay. Well, if this doesn't work, I'll have to. Oh, there it goes. It's fine. Yeah, weird. All right. So this is the same idea. You start out by it showing you what happens when you don't do anything, when you don't protect your structures. An invader comes in and breaks them. Screen turns red. Now I immediately go here because having another illustration of that is useless. Now notice what happens now. This is not me moving the mouse. This is a tutorial that I have triggered when you don't move the deflector enough. The game assumes that you don't know how to do drag and drop, because I saw at least one person just failing to realize how to use drag and drop. So I figured I would like the game to actually explain that if somebody doesn't know this. People going to the internet to the interactive showcase are people who just enjoy Troy Night Out, which has a lot of events and a lot of arts. They're not necessarily gamers. They're not necessarily people who have. We've had somebody, at least one person, who was for whom the first video game they ever played was at an interactive showcase. So I wanted my game to allow people, to the best of their abilities, to play the game, even if they're not familiar with a lot of even the basics of interaction that maybe I would find familiar, and maybe most gamers would find familiar, or even most users of complex interfaces. So yeah, so the only way to get out of that loop is to actually move this significantly. And when I move it, notice something interesting happen. It's way slower. I've made it so that you can't drag it as fast as you like. And that makes it so that you have to be a bit more strategic, because you can't just flop around and do whatever you want. You have to have a sense of where things are coming, and use information that you're given. So now, I didn't have sensors, but I did have audio. So I had audio that told me where the invaders are coming from. If you're not listening in stereo, then you might miss it. But the sounds are basically 3D sound events, which come from outside the screen, but in the directions that make sense. So that's kind of part of the build-up here. And notice that there's this nice little green square. This is to indicate a score. So there wasn't a scoring mechanism in the last two iterations, and I figured a visual scoring system would be the most adapted to this very geometric way of expressing the game. So now we have audio and these sensors, so it builds up the idea that these sensors are telling you where these things are coming from, and it derives from an experience you had in the previous stage where audio told you where things were coming from. Now your score is 2, which is nice. Now you have something a bit more complicated. You have more sensors that are telling you more about where things are coming from, and this is to get you used to triangulating. And you save 2 structures, you get 2 more points, and now we get to this level. So I figured that having these this large amount of structures in the middle was just really confusing. So instead I made one large structure. And you'll notice that the sensors, in order for them to not act as well as protection, they turn around. And now this level is again the build-up level where an unfamiliar player first realizes that things are coming out of the 4th dimension. And yeah, there's a bit of a delay, and this one is heavier, so it's harder to move. So you really need to move the deflectors right. And again, I know how the game works, so I knew what to anticipate. But a lot of people found this very surprising. Yeah, and this one is the final level. This is where you don't get a good configuration for how to protect your objects. So you're supposed to move your objects away from each other so that it's easier to protect them, and then put triangulation sensors by them, and hopefully not mess it up like I am. And then that should tell you where the things are coming from. So you have these sensors here. They should help you realize that something's coming from here, on the left side of the screen, and you can slowly see something coming on the right side of the screen. And yeah, so it's a bit of a waiting game, but it's more strategic this way, or it felt like it. And it also went in the direction I wasn't expecting. So you kind of need the 2 defenders and everything. So here I didn't get a perfect score because I missed one. But basically it was an idea of getting a visual scoring mechanism. And basically the whole build-up to the game was you have set pieces. Each of them is trying to teach you something. And then the rest of the game, if I were to expand it further, would have would have you have a certain amount of resources in trying to defend the structures by positioning them correctly. So yeah, this one again has all the fancy boilerplate. Let's see. So let's keep playing. Notice this, that you have a score. That wasn't intentional, but that was what happened in this version of the game. You have the score keeps up with new games, which it's kind of a new game plus, but since there isn't any new functionality, it's a bug that I took care of. You'll also notice that the structures stay squared off, which isn't really. I mean, it wasn't really something I wanted to happen. It was just frustrating in ways that it wasn't the right frustration, basically, that I wanted from people playing the game. So, and the final, the latest iteration I had, and it's the iteration you can find on itch.io, itch.io, I guess.
Itch.io. I say itch.io.
Itch.io.
Probably pisses.
I've read these things more than I've spoken them, which is a problem with many words for me. So this is the final version with a lot of this bug fixing taking into a lot of these bugs taken into account. So this is going to be a lot like the previous version. You can run, but it's futile. Again, if you don't do anything, it's going to give you a tutorial. And it hand-holds you through this process. So you're supposed to do this, and do that. And I forgot how this goes. It has been a while. And it's getting late. So yeah, so here all you have is audio cues, or your memory. One of the problems with the audio cues is that the speakers here aren't aligned exactly, so it's not very as helpful for me as it would be for you. But you'll notice what happened when I moved the square around. It actually it isn't locked, so it spins around, and so if there's any close quarters going on, and you're not doing silly things like I just was. It won't get in your way that you have this structure. It's not going to be as obnoxious. See a dev play his own game poorly. Let's see. So yes, that was a close one. So the scoring system, again, this level, which is all about triangulation, with a lot of additional triangulating, more triangles than you need. And this is the same game, and again, now that you can move this around, that makes certain things easier. What's this? Yeah. So it's still heavy, and I still wouldn't recommend moving this around. Oh, and notice this. This is a difference from the other one. The one other problem you had with the previous versions is that I had the invaders coming from specific points. So you could game the game by moving your structure away from them and basically going to a corner. And if you knew what the pattern was, you knew that it wasn't going to come from the corner. So what I did was it's still a set piece, but the invaders come at a certain given relative distance from the structure you're defending. So it doesn't help you to try and be clever like this. So yeah, I think that's the main difference. Let me just go through this set piece. Yeah, now you have to do this at the very last minute because, yeah. So this is the final version. So again, you have to move to. This is a template for for potential future levels where you would have to be structuring these things and deciding on your own pattern of defense. And yeah, again, you can move these around, and then these flip over. If you're dragging something, then it's not going to spin around. But if you're not dragging it, then it's going to spin around. Yeah. Yeah. So same problem. I kept trying to move things away, move the structure away, but the invaders are following it because that's what they're seeking. And I have all this whole backstory that isn't really interesting until I have a really good implementation of it. There we go. Yeah, I missed one at some point. Yeah, so that's the latest version. It came out, I think, I want to say May or June, and haven't really worked at it since. I've been working on, I have a day job now, a very exciting job at Flyinside Inc, which is virtual reality flight simulation. Very exciting, but doesn't provide a lot of time for this, for indie development. Although hopefully I'll make some progress eventually. So yeah, so you'll notice that I've gone through several types of interfaces. Let's start from the beginning and jump back and forth a few times, and let's put this at a reasonable resolution so it's easier to see what's going on for people at home. Yeah. So the score is still way too small. In my really low resolution screen, it looked great, but whatever. So this is keyboard controlled, which makes for a more sensible, fast action-paced, fast-paced action game. And that's one direction where playing defensive could go. It could be all about quick responses. But that means that the detectors will have to do a lot of other work because let's see, is this the one? Yeah, I think that's the one. Let's go. Yeah, no, actually, this is fine. Right? Yeah, let's ignore this for to click in a specific place. So moving other things around with the keyboard is not as fun. It's not very accurate. It basically means if I want this to be more of an arcade-ish game, I will need to decide to do things differently. One possibility is to just have two deflectors you can control and have them basically pass through these kinds of structures, or have these structures be completely static and be something that the deflectors need to maneuver around rather than moving them. This is somewhat close to what I eventually ended up doing, but this is a bit complicated. Interfaces that connect keyboards and mice in this way are kind of hard to deal with. And also, using mice for fast-paced things like this. I mean, with first-person shooters, it's very common these days to basically move and strafe with a keyboard and turn yourself around with the mouse. But that basically has direct feedback as to where you're looking. You always know where you're looking by just looking straight ahead of you. When you have a mouse that you need to move around, it gets very difficult to do anything quickly and precisely, and you need precision to do what you were doing with say this version, with the version with a pointed click interface. So something mouse based. So you can have something mouse based really quick. That's really quick, but if you have to have more than one object, it gets difficult because you have this inclination to if you're trying to move fast, you want to move fast, and then doing something with precision, it doesn't necessarily connect very well. So that was one of the reasons I moved with the next version to having your game objects basically slowly drag behind your mouse. That has the problem that it feels counterintuitive because you see yourself moving the mouse in a certain way, but it's just telling that thing where to slowly go. An interface that would probably make a little bit more sense is something like with real-time strategy games where you would basically click this and then tell it to go somewhere else, and that makes more sense because the actual motion itself isn't something that you're controlling directly with the mouse. All you have to do is decide what the starting point is, what some kind something, one of your game objects, and somewhere you want this game object to go. There's basically many ways of going with the game forward. One of the problems is that at this point, which is the end point as of now, the game hasn't decided whether it's going to be fast action or more of a strategic game. Another thing that I could do is make it more turn-based, or have it really be more like tower defense, where I'm creating static structures and they help me, but that's going to be very difficult because things are coming from the third dimension, and you normally you have to be dynamic to deal with that. Fundamentally, it's not really something you can really have a static defense against. So I'm not. The takeaway is that I don't exactly know what would be the next step with the game. I have some ideas. I have ideas that are very different from what this is. One idea I had was to make it a first-person game. Now, let me take a step back. If you've ever played Wolfenstein 3D or Doom, the original Doom, you were basically playing a two-dimensional game. But due to the genius of the people involved, like Carmack, they've managed to render something that looks three-dimensional, gives a three-dimensional sense, but is actually two-dimensional intrinsically. So how would this game be a first-person game? So if you were an entirely two-dimensional creature, your intuitions would help guide you through a two-dimensional world. You wouldn't find two dimensions restricted, and you wouldn't have an easier time looking at it from above, which is what basically the game, both of these main versions of the game did. But if we cheat a bit, and if we say, okay, I'm going to show you the three-dimensional person, a three-dimensional image, but really it's just representing two dimensions of degrees of freedom, then you can have some of your spatial orientation intuitions, albeit constrained, and you can the visual cues can be stretched out in a certain way that makes sense to you, but it would still fundamentally you would still be constrained to two-dimension, and you wouldn't have really more information than somebody who was living in a two-dimensional space would, which was. A two-dimensional creature would be looking around and see basically a circle around them. Like they would be seeing lines. They would be taking two lines, basically lines of information from one line of information from each eye, and combining them together to get a two-dimensional sense of the world. But they wouldn't be. So it's training a person to do that is maybe difficult, but getting somebody to have a fake three-dimensional effect, which is kind of like Wolfenstein 3D, and then having invaders coming from a third dimension as being something that appears in that, that doesn't strain credulity too much, and then that might help create the kind of intuitions you'd need to play a game that was brain defensive, or whatever I'll call the next step, which is a game where you are in three dimensions and things are coming from the fourth dimension and you have to deal with that, which is not going to be straightforward, although now that I have a bit more experience with 3D graphics and VR interfaces, it might be not as impossible as it was 6 months ago. So yeah, I think I've talked enough about my game. How much time did it take?
I think it's like an hour.
Wow. Okay. Cool.
Really
Awesome. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to me and seeing me horribly play my games. I hope you've learned a lot about what not to do in your games. I will say that to those of you who are aspiring video game designers, build something really simple and really basic and test it out on other people, and do that very often, because the greatest source of information for you is how other people interact with your game, and ultimately that's the kind of experience you're creating. Get as much feedback as possible. The interactive showcase has been a real boon for me personally, and I'm sure for a lot of other people, as it's not only does it have a lot of people playing your games, it's a lot of people who are not necessarily familiar with video games at all, or games at all, experiencing your game. So you get to see your game from the eyes of diverse cast of people, and that really helps improve your game. You can also always decide that your game is not going to appeal to certain people, because you decide that you're creating a 4X strategy game, and you want to address people for whom that's the natural thing to do, and that's fine. If you're starting out, though, it's probably a good idea not to pigeonhole yourself too much, because there's a lot of technical things that you just don't know yet, and just getting feedback from people is the best way to know not just how to get these technical things done well, but know which of them is important, which of them is not as important. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed yourselves, and I'll hand it back to John.
Hey, thank you, Klil.
I got a
Is there a question?
Questions?
Okay, if there's
Yeah.
any questions from other people, I'll be happy to try and answer them.
I was wondering if in future iterations were you planning on including references to flatland?
Well, right now all I have is so right now I call it flatland meets survival horror. It's a good question, because flatland is a lot more about exploring other dimensions than being really afraid of them, and maybe that's a better direction to go. The problem so I might refer to flatland more so in the future, but I'd have to find a way which is a bit honest to how a two-dimensional creature would handle that themselves, rather than being guided by a third-dimensional creature, because ultimately what's continually bothering me with iterations of this game is I keep cheating in ways that might miss the important parts of it. So the first game had actual 3D rendering, which is something a two-dimensional creature just wouldn't have.
Yes.
The second series of iterations have proximity detectors, which would be fine for a two-dimensional creature, but we're still looking from above, from a God's eye view. And again, that's not something that a two-dimensional creature would necessarily have. They could have some kind of a situational awareness thing where you could think of some kind of a control room that has information from a bunch of other places, but it's fundamentally dishonest to the premise of something that we can then translate into 3 dimensions versus 4 dimensions. So that's why I was thinking in terms of that first person thing where it's fake 3 dimensions, but it's real in the sense that you're stuck inside of them and you're looking from the inside out. But then there's the problem. Okay, so it's one thing to react to invaders coming from the 3rd dimension, because they're impinging on the 2 dimensions, so they're in 2 dimensions and you can do something about them. How do you explore things that are outside of spaces that you can deal with your language?
Sorry, I'm just gonna do a thing real quick.
Maybe something from maybe, I don't know, maybe something that's kind of like the rotations that you do in Fez or in Megakure, where you're just rotating through another dimension, but I don't know, something about that just doesn't feel satisfactory. I feel like there has to be a way that is more from the inside. And if I remember Flatland correctly, it's been years since I've read it, but if I remember correctly, it's all about this two-dimensional creature being pulled out of 2 dimensions and kind of being given a God's eye view of the 2 dimensions they lived in.
Yes.
And that's kind of what we have here, and kind of what I don't want to have, because because if I keep thinking of my future 3D to 4D game or 3D to whatever dimensions game. And that's not something that could be translated there because I'm not going to create even a VR experience. It's basically somebody pulling you out and showing you 3D from the four-dimensional space. That's not how it's going to work exactly. The closest thing I've seen was there's an experience somebody made for the Rift with Leap Motion, and I guess it could work with the touch or whatever. I haven't played around with it, but it's basically playing around with the Tesseract. That's a four-dimensional cube, and you can kind of rotate it through a bunch of different dimensions, including the fourth dimension, and it's kind of a way of exploring that four-dimensional shape through its three-dimensional projections. That could kind of be it, but it's the same. It's similar to the idea of having some kind of rotating through the fourth dimension, like in the demos of the demo videos I've seen of Megakura. Unfortunately, there isn't a playable demo out there in the wild, which I wish there were. I know the designer had a demo in one of the PAXs a few years ago, but I've been waiting for that game for at least 5 years. It's just an amazing. I mean, I hope it comes out because that would be really cool. But again, it would be a bit different because it seems like it's still the premises of the fourth dimension. There is kind of like all of these worlds you can rotate into are legitimate three-dimensional worlds. While if you're living in a three-dimensional membrane inside of a multiple dimensional space, if you rotate outside of your space, you're gonna be just falling off into outside the universe, unless you do it very very specifically. So I don't know. It's something that
Yeah.
I hope that also answers your question aside from being.
Well, I didn't mean like direct inspiration. I meant like you can throw in quotes or you can borrow a character or.
That's a possibility. I'd have to reread the book more recently than must have been more than a decade now. Probably 15 years ago. When did I read this? A long time ago. Anyway, yeah, it's probably a good idea for me to reread it, just if only to get some inspiration and to feel more comfortable using the name and the description of the game I'm making. But yeah, yeah. Any more questions?
But yeah, I want to say thanks to Klil for coming out and talking about this game, and I mean it's really cool to see like the entire process. I mean, because like for instance, like when I was working on Slap Friends, like I think there's probably like 3 actual builds. The last build even was like still in Unity Editor. Like at GDC, I was demoing it in Unity Editor, which like a couple people commented on. But like, it's cool to see. I mean, you don't see that like often, I guess, with like local, or indie people doing it on their own. So it's really cool to see like just snapshots of like where your design is at, and you can see directly how like each one like iterated, which I don't know, I like that a lot. But yeah, no, I mean, I've seen this game, like, when Klil came to the game space and, I mean, like he was saying, like, we all encourage him to work on his dreams, and then he had this, like, really cool game that, is exciting to, like, see take shape. And hopefully some point in the future he could return to it as pesky things like making money and keeping food on the table.
And learning amazing three-dimensional graphics in VR. I mean, I don't want people to come out thinking that I have this horrendous job. Working on VR is basically a dream for me and for many people. It's I get paid to do it, so I'm not complaining. But in terms of what services the game itself, it's gonna take a back seat for a while.
But yeah, no, I mean, thanks again, because this was fun.
It was really cool hearing your whole process, like as a whole. I remember seeing different versions as you went along. So it's really cool.
But yeah, so I guess we'll start closing out. I mean, like I said, this is going to be like a shorter stream, and I think most devs play streams will be like this. Because, I mean, I don't know, it's like we play a game, but like, most of these games are like pretty short, and you could talk about for an hour, but I don't know, whatever. But yeah, So, I mean, I think this is a really good, strong start to the return of it. We're still lining up the next developer. Probably going to be closer to the middle of the month. We'll have to see. Next week, we are going to probably be playing Firewatch, which was Patrick.
Yes.
Patrick seems tired.
I am a bit tired.
But Patrick is hosting the next game club and has chosen Firewatch, so we'll probably get through a stream of that. And we'll have to figure it out because I want to have the Firewatch stream before the actual game club this time. But I think I'm going to try and plan out the next month of streams because we've been doing it very haphazardly, but I'd like to actually get a regular schedule going. So I think probably the one after that might be another game club, or not game club, game jam collection.
Okay.
And then
From the Pound and Glue games.
that's true. We could do that.
We could ask for people. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yes, there's. If you're in the area, I guess tomorrow. Well, no, Sunday. Sunday at the Troy's Arts Center, we're going to be having Black History Month game jam, which is part of our Include series. So that's also an old thing that's returning. Frederica has more info about that since she's been running it.
Yeah, I remember. I've been managing the Eventbrite page. There's one ticket left.
Yeah, so you
We
better
have 19 people who signed up.
better jump on that one ticket.
Yeah.
Yeah, the weather on Sunday is probably going to be not very good, so something indoors would be probably a good idea.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. So.
The art center has heating.
Yes. But yeah, so I mean, we'll be posting probably our schedule for these streams a lot further out because I'd like to not have to put everything together the week before. But yeah, anyway, so I mean we have that. We have our lesson night streams. I think our next lesson night is still a whiles off, but anyway, so I mean, always a good idea to follow us on Facebook and Twitter to see our local event updates. Because we always have events every Wednesday at our physical location in Troy, and we'll also be posting when we go live here and all that. So I mean we're always live here Friday nights. It's at the point of night where I'm kind of just meandering, blathering on. All right, but yeah, I mean thanks everyone for watching, and we hope to see you again next week. And now it's the time to click on stop streaming.